Listening Library presents The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs. Outside, the night was cold and wet. Lake Snam Villa was isolated, and the roads were a torrent and useless on such a rainy night. But inside the villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess. Mr. White had radical ideas about the game, and he put his king in unnecessary perils. Hark at that wind! I should hardly think that Morris will come tonight. That's the worst of living so far out. It's a slushy, beastly mess. Check. Mate.
Never mind, dear. Perhaps you'll win the next one.
Before she could add more condolences, the three people heard the gate banging, and then a knock at the door. The group hurried to greet their guest. Sergeant Major Morris introduced himself. He'd been absent for a long time. 21 years of service in the East. When he went away, he was a slip of a youth in the warehouse. Now, look at him. Their visitor appeared uncomfortable as the Whites pressed him to tell of his adventures. I'd like to go to India myself. Just look around a bit, you know. I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers. You're better off where you are. He put down his empty glass and shook his head softly. What's that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw? Well, it's a bit of what you might call magic. If you look at it, it's just an ordinary little paw dried to a mummy. He took it out of his pocket and held it up for examination. Then put it on the table.
What's so special about it?
It had a spell put on it by an old fakir, a very holy man who wanted to show that fate rules people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow. His spell was that 3 separate men could have 3 wishes. The first man used 2 wishes. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got it. Would you want another 3 wishes if you could have them? I don't know. I don't know. Suddenly, he threw the paw into the fire. Better let it burn. If you don't want it, give it to me. Mr. White retrieved the talisman from the fire. But again, Morris warned, I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it on the fire again like a sensible man. How do you do it? Hold it in your right hand and wish aloud. But I warn you of the consequences. If you must wish, wish for something sensible. With that, Mr. White put the talisman aside, and his wife rose to prepare them all some dinner. After a quiet dinner, the family and their guest talked again of Morris's experience in India. The monkey's paw was forgotten, and soon Morris rose and made his departure. When the family was alone, Mr. White took up the monkey's paw again and considered all that he had learned about it. I don't know what to wish for. That's a fact. Seems I've got all I want. Remembering the £200 that remained on his home mortgage, he held up the talisman and distinctly spoke the words, I wish for £200. It moved. As I wished, it twisted in my hand like a snake. Well, I don't see the money, and I bet I never shall. As the parents and son retired for the night, Herbert couldn't resist a final joke. I expect you will find the cash tied in a bag in the middle of your bed. The next morning, the bright wintry sun shone over the breakfast table as Herbert laughed about the affair of the monkey's paw and the 200 pounds. The money might fall on your head from the sky, Dad.
Morris said the things happen naturally, so that you might attribute it to coincidence.
Well, don't break into the money before I come home from work. Everyone laughed, and Herbert departed for Moore and Muggin's factory where he worked.
He'll have some more of his funny remarks, I suppose, when he comes home.
Later that morning, Mrs. White noticed a strange man hesitantly approaching the house. In mental connection with the 200 pounds, she noticed that he was well dressed and wore a silk hat. He finally came to the door and knocked. They ushered the stranger into the house. I was asked to call. I come from Moore and Muggin's.
What's happened to Herbert?
I'm sorry. He was badly hurt. But he's not in any pain now. For a moment, the mother appeared relieved. Then the sinister meaning of such assurance dawned on her. He was caught in the machinery. He was the only one left us. It's hard. The firm wishes me to convey their sincere sympathy, and although they admit no liability for his death, in consideration of your son's services, they wish me to present you with a certain sum as compensation. How much? 200 pounds. Unconscious of his wife's scream, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hands and dropped in a senseless heap to the floor. In the huge cemetery some 2 miles distant, the two old people buried their son. It was all over so quickly that at first they could hardly realize it. They remained in a state of expectation, as if waiting for something to happen to lighten this load, which was too heavy for old hearts to bear. Time passed, however, and one night the following week the old man woke suddenly, stretched out his hand, and found himself alone. The room was in darkness, and the sound of subdued weeping came from the window.
Oh, Herbert, oh. The monkey's paw. The monkey's paw. Where is it? I only thought of it just now. Why didn't I think of it before? Why didn't you think of it? We've 2 other wishes. We've only had one.
Was that not enough?
No, we'll have one more. Go down and get it, quick.
He brought the monkey's paw back into their bedroom. It's foolish, and it's wicked. But he lifted the talisman into the air.
Wish. Wish.
I wish my son alive again. He collapsed on the bed, and the expectant woman stood briefly at the window. When the candle burnt below the rim of the candlestick and expired, she returned to bed where her husband lay. Sighing, she pulled up the covers. Both lay silently, still listening to the ticking of the clock. A stair creaked, and a squeaky mouse scurried noisily through the wall. Then, a barely audible knock came from the front door. The woman sat up in bed. Then a loud, resounding knock went through the house. It's a rat.
It's Herbert. I forgot the cemetery is 2 miles distant. What are you holding me for? Let me go. I must open the door and let him in.
She tried to struggle out of his grasp. The knocking continued, and the woman finally broke away and hurried to the front door. Her husband heard the chain rattle and the bottom bolt drawn.
The bolt. I can't reach it. Help!
He heard her drag a chair against the door. Suddenly, he imagined his mutilated son before him, and he fell to the floor in search of the talisman. If only he could find it before the thing outside got in. He heard the bolt being freed as he groped in the dark and finally touched the monkey's paw. He frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking ceased, but the echo continued. He heard the door open. Cold wind rushed up the stairs, and then came the sound of a long wail of disappointment and misery. He hurried to meet her at the door, and they went together to the gate, where a streetlight flickered and shone on an empty and deserted road.